Now, welcome to another Let's Talk Some Star Wars, where this time, in honor of the 8th anniversary of the release of The Force Awakens, the question is going to be, how did you feel about The Force Awakens when it first came out? And then in the comments below, which I'll be reading and responding to in just a few moments, tell us how you feel about it today. Alright, and wasting no time and getting right to the results, we'll see that 12% of voters thought it was amazing and or loved it back in the day. 43% then said it was pretty good or they enjoyed it. 29% said it was okay and or they were maybe a little mixed on how to feel. That then left 12% to say it wasn't very good and or they were rather disappointed. And a final 4% who thought it was horrible and or absolutely hated it way back then. And quite honestly, I wouldn't have been surprised if these results weren't even higher or better. Not that they're not pretty good when you really think about it. I mean, this is pretty positive. Over half the people who voted enjoyed it at the very least, with another almost a third kind of in that, well, we'll kind of wait and see, we have mixed feelings about it category. And I would kind of put myself more in the pretty much enjoyed it category. I was excited, as were a lot of people, to see where this was going. I started doing YouTube shortly after this movie came out because I was confident this was going somewhere. I thought they must have a plan, that of course you wouldn't just put out a movie and have no idea where you were going next or allow others to come in and change it. So I was excited to see what this first movie was leading to, and I figured, of course, it was leading somewhere. And well, now here we are 8 years later. Alright, and before moving on to some comments, let me just once again quickly say thank you to everybody who votes, comments, and watches these or any of my videos across both the channels. It is very much appreciated, as I appreciate all of those who support this channel and the other one over on Patreon. Thank you so much for that. And now let's kick this off, as we always do, with the top rated comment, which this time comes to us from Oaktales64, who said, "I liked it on release, but was a little annoyed how close it was to A New Hope, and I felt Disney was playing it way too safe." And I don't necessarily fault them, nor was I surprised by them playing it rather safe here. I think before you try to do something different and unique or your own with Star Wars, I think you wanted to go back and do traditional Star Wars. You wanted to prove that we can do quote-unquote George Lucas style Star Wars before you take it in a whole other direction, perhaps. I think most of us assumed, and a lot of comments talked about this too, that after this movie we were going to do something different. And well, yes, they did do something different. But my point is, I don't really blame them. I think you had to be very careful. You just spent $4 billion on this franchise. You wanted to prove you know what Star Wars is. And I think for a lot of people, this movie felt like Star Wars back then. Maybe not so much anymore, maybe not so much in hindsight. But I think this movie captured a lot of feelings, especially for casual fans, average viewers, that this is Star Wars, that it's back. And so no, I really don't blame them for going or leaning heavily into the nostalgia or kind of redoing A New Hope. That's exactly what I expected. I just, like I said before, expected there to be a plan. I expected there to be something that came after this that proved, okay, we know what Star Wars is, here's what it can be, and of course they didn't pull that off. Alright, and next up we have this one from Athal Yankee, who said, "Biggest mistake, especially in hindsight, of Episode 7 was not having Luke, Leia, and Han reunite on screen." And I couldn't agree more. I just got done talking about how I knew, or pretty much figured, this was going to be kind of a nostalgia trip, that I don't necessarily blame them for leaning heavily into the nostalgia and going back and giving people exactly what they loved about the original Star Wars, even if that wasn't how you felt about it. That's what they tried to do. And yet they failed to put the big characters back on screen together, which would have been the ultimate, which is what everybody was kind of waiting for and expecting and looking forward to. And so I do think that absolutely the biggest mistake they made was not giving this movie to these characters more or less and then slowly integrating in the new characters, kind of passing on the torch. And one of the problems they sort of had with that, said by Michael Arndt, the original screenwriter on Episode 7, was that every time Luke Skywalker came into the picture, every time he was on screen, he kind of stole the spotlight from all the new characters. And so what I think you do is you lean into that. I think you really do just give this movie, again, more or less to the old characters. You have the other characters kind of there in the background, certainly helping, certainly playing their part. But make this the Luke Skywalker movie after 35 years of fans waiting to see him again. Make it also the Han and Leia movie. Show that they had been successful in whatever endeavors they pursued after the original trilogy ended. Have Leia be the Chancellor. Have Han running his own business. Do something to show these characters had been successful instead of bringing them low in order to bring the new characters high. I think that was one of the bigger mistakes they also made. Anyway, let's move on to this comment from Juice, who said, "I was about 14 when The Force Awakens came out, and the trilogy as a whole I enjoyed, when they first came out, but as the movies age and as I've aged, the OT and prequel trilogy simply just have more meaning when everything comes full circle. And there were a ton of comments like this one from people who said they were 14 or 12 or 16 and it was the first Star Wars movie they'd ever seen in the theater and they were super excited and they liked it and all of these things. And then as the trilogy went on, their interest faded. And it's kind of sad to think that, yeah, Disney, Lucasfilm under Disney, whatever you want to call them, that they did have the younger generation on the hook, it feels like. But they failed to reel them in. They failed to make them Disney Star Wars fans. I get asked all the time if in 10 more years will the sequels be loved by the fandom because all these kids who grew up with it are going to take over the fandom and they're going to do what happened to the prequels or whatever. And I don't think that's going to be the case. A lot of Star Wars fans who are younger that I talk to say they like the old stuff better than they like the new stuff. I'm not saying no kids or nobody grew up with the sequels that are going to love them and get to have a louder voice in a few years, but I don't think it's going to be as drastic as some people claim it's going to be. Like I said, I think Disney hooked the younger generation, but then they dragged him into the wrong shoreline. They dragged him into the prequels and the OT, and they also kind of have this resentment towards Disney Star Wars. A lot of them do, I feel like. Okay, and moving on now, we have this comment from Andrew Foster, who said, "My immediate takeaway on release was, that was fun, but the best thing it did was set up really fun characters and stories for episodes 8 and 9. How good it ends up being will come down to how good its payoffs are. That didn't go well." And the crazy thing is, if 8 and 9 had been more universally loved, if they'd been exceptional movies and the trilogy on the whole made sense and was fantastic, we'd all be looking back at episode 7 as the movie that kicked it off and as a movie that was pretty dang good for doing that. More so than maybe any other movie I've ever seen before, it really was dependent long term on how well the movies that came after it were. It did such a interesting job of setting up the rest of the trilogy, or so it felt at the time, with a lot of mysteries like Rey's parents, who's Snoke, Knights of Ren, you can go on and on. So if all of those had been, again, great payoffs, as the comment mentions, we'd all be looking back and go, wow, what an amazing movie that was to set up such a great trilogy. Instead, this comment from Henry's Entertainment Journal kind of sums it up better. "Today, I see it as a 2-hour and 20-minute tease for an epic trilogy that never came to be." Alright, we then move on to this one from Grand Admiral Thrawn, who said, "I was so hyped for this movie, for the return of Star Wars to the theaters. I hadn't been this way since The Phantom Menace was released in 3D. I was making Star Wars trivia questions on Facebook leading up to the release. I was doing countdowns. In the end, it was okay, with some mixed feelings after I walked out of the theater. At the time, I wasn't sure if it was me overhyping or that the movie didn't deliver. After multiple rewatches with different groups, myself, friends, and family, I came to the conclusion that it was both." And yeah, the hype and excitement around this movie was absolutely insane. I think the only movies that can maybe match it are Endgame and probably The Phantom Menace. And I think The Phantom Menace, because it came out in the early days of the internet, if you will, in the day and age before social media, I think that would have been the most hyped movie in history, because even without all that, it was an extremely hyped movie. But anyway, I was super excited. I saw The Force Awakens 3 times opening night, back to back to back, which doesn't break my record of 4 times for The Phantom Menace on opening day. But I was excited. We were all excited. We always hear about how no one hates Star Wars like Star Wars fans, but it's not true. We wanted to love this movie. We wanted to love the sequel trilogy. We wanted to love Disney Star Wars. I don't know any fans out there who wanted it to fail, except for maybe people who've always hated Disney or something like that, which is fine. That's your prerogative. But the vast, vast majority of fans wanted to love this new era of Star Wars. We crossed our fingers and we hoped. And so far it's been a mixed bag at best. And so it really irks me when I hear people say that no one hates Star Wars like Star Wars fans. No one loves their franchise like Star Wars fans. That's how I look at it. And I know the negativity, the toxicity, I know that's frustrating for some people who just want to love it. But it comes from a place of love. I know that sounds stupid, it sounds ridiculous, but that's the truth of it. We all want to love Star Wars so much that it hurts when it's bad. It hurts when we see a company take it and mismanage it. And we get frustrated and we say as much in maybe not the kindest ways sometimes. Alright, and with that, I'm just going to do a few final comments before wrapping it up. Starting with this one from Justin Luther, who said, "I remember enjoying the aesthetics and characters mostly, but feeling a little empty after leaving the theater. The combo of Han dying and Luke not showing up until the last 30 seconds made me realize we weren't going to get the OG crew reunion I had been anticipating since the first preview, but I was still optimistic that the next movie would deliver. Little did I know." We then also have this one from KJM1984 who said, "Not gonna lie, I thought it was pretty awesome when it first came out. I found it less good on repeat viewings though, but still good." We then move on to this one from Sid7903 who said, "The Force Awakens was more like an event than going to see a movie. It was the first Star Wars movie I ever saw in theaters, so it's kind of special to me. I like the movie itself a lot too. It's a nice homage back to A New Hope while also still standing as its own thing." We also have this one from Witch Doctor Will who said, "I was only newly into film critique analysis. I remember walking out of the theater having had a good time and telling my then girlfriend, this movie will rise and fall depending on its sequels. That sentiment held true." Our next comment then comes to us from Z Rally who said, "I've only seen 5 movies 2 times in theaters and 1 movie 3 times. The Force Awakens is that 3-time movie. The mystery box made for a great foundation. It left me both wanting more and wondering if I had missed something important." And finally, we have this one from ZT Unseen who said, "After first watching it, I thought it was a fun, harmless, if not a little safe Star Wars episode. Looking back, it set up so many good arcs for each of the characters, my favorite being Finn. I mean, we get to see the world through an ex-stormtrooper's eyes, realize his fear and understanding that serving the Empire was never ever his choice. I absolutely loved to see that side of things and see him grow and change throughout the movie to become someone with the courage and bravery not to run away, but to fight back. Too bad we never saw the end of that. Instead, he chases after every girl character introduced. First Rey, then Rose, then Jannah. He seems to have no agency of his own anymore. It only follows these and other characters around. Now when I look back at The Force Awakens, I can only think about how naive I was, and that this movie, at least for me, marked the end of Star Wars." Well, that's all I got for this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you thought of The Force Awakens back in the day, 8 years ago when it came out, and tell me what you think about it today. So again, take to the comments below, let's talk some Star Wars, and until next time, thanks for watching.